It is my honor to introduce Lauren Smith, who is the medical director of the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And as we have said a couple of times today, a lot of states are now making laws on concussions. And Dr. Smith, who was instrumental in the Massachusetts law and has been a great friend to this conference, she spoke last year as well. And it's a very interesting talk, and we'll sort of summarize a lot of the things we also talked about this morning. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Smith.
Thank you. So it looks like you've had, thank you, and I'm so excited to be here. I'm especially excited to see so many people here, even beyond what you had last year, which was a full house. I drove in a little while ago, and you were all outside eating your lunch in the warm sunshine, and I could see that there was a lot of folks. This is really exciting for us as a department that there is such exceptional level of interest in this topic and in thinking about how we can keep young athletes, or all athletes, safer. So what Mark asked me to talk about today was specifically the DPH role in the regulations that were developed after the passage of the law by the legislature. So that's what I'm going to talk with you about today. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview. I won't spend a lot of time on that because obviously you guys have been steeped in that already this morning. I want to spend most of my time looking at the law and the regulations so that you all are aware and up to date on what the implications of that is. And then spend some time on the role of different actors, different key stakeholders in this what has to be a combined effort, and then talk about how it's gone so far. How has the implementation gone since we've been doing this? You all may have seen this data. It's from our Massachusetts Youth Health Survey, which is really the only surveillance data that the state has looking at head injuries among youth. And in 2009, 18% of the youth that answered that report, answered that survey, which covers middle and high school students, said that they'd had a head injury that was serious enough to cause one of the symptoms you see: unconsciousness, memory problems, blurry vision, et cetera. So that's a not insignificant number. And then if you multiply that by an estimate of the number of kids who are involved in interscholastic athletics, at least, or extracurricular athletics, that leads you to about 36,000 sports-related head injuries. That's obviously sort of a back-of-the-envelope calculation, but it does give a sense of what the scale of the issue is here in Massachusetts. So, and you may have seen a Globe article, I want to say it's been a month or so ago, where they interviewed, or they surveyed a few schools, 26 metropolitan Boston area high schools, and in that sort of unscientific, if you will, survey that the Globe did, they found 338 head injuries that were reported through that mechanism. So this is from the Globe. It's more than a few months ago. It's back in February. So here I just picked, again, there was a bunch of schools. I just picked some of them, and I thought it was interesting to see how the schools were reporting and what it was that they were saying that they were seeing. So you can see that the light blue bars are head injuries related to football. The dark blue section is for girls soccer, and then the sort of teal is for boys soccer. Now, we haven't yet received any of the head injury report forms, which I'll talk to you about, which are what happened at the end of the school year. But this gives a little bit of a snapshot, and part of me wonders if these numbers are likely to increase initially before they decrease because of the increased awareness that people have and the lower threshold that we're all asking people to have for acknowledging and identifying folks. But here's quite an interesting difference. One thing that I actually live in Newton, and my son's about to go to high school, and I thought it was very interesting that Newton South and Newton North had very different levels of injuries reported. Similar student body size, similar sort of approach to athletics. It's interesting to see how, that level of difference. Unfortunately, I guess, from my point of view, my son's slated to go to Newton South, so I'll have to sort of think about what the implications of that is. In terms of the head injury regulation, so there are specific, the statute, there's specific aspects of the law that is important for you all to know about. One is that the law required that DPH identify training programs for key stakeholders that you see listed there: athletic directors, coaches, trainers, as well, and importantly, parents and students themselves. We were also required to emphasize that injured athletes who were suspected of a concussion must be removed from play. And I think it's really important to underscore that in the statute it says suspected of concussion, not that they've been definitively diagnosed with concussion. And that, I think, is an important piece throughout all of this. And that the students had to disclose head injuries prior to the start of each season. And I will say that the start of each season is what's in the statute, not once a year, but the start of each season that they're going to be playing, because that has come up. And, the rationale for that, obviously, is for the coaching staff, the athletic staff, to know whether or not a student has had a head injury, so that they might need to have a modified approach to their involvement in the sports. There's some requirements around record keeping, establishment of penalties. It gave the department the authority to establish penalties for noncompliance. I have to say that has not been our emphasis. We really feel like we've been much more effective being able to partner with schools and the key stakeholders rather than spending our time thinking about penalties, but it did give us the authority to do that. We have not chosen to exercise that authority, and that DPH has to do the regulations. So how did we approach doing this? And really, we felt like we had an opportunity to do this well because we were given the authority to come up with these regulations. And to do that, we convened internal staff that were in areas that this was relevant for, including all those you see there, as well as convening an external clinical advisory group. We knew that we were fortunate to be in a place where there were so many experts around who had done seminal work in this, who were nationally recognized for their work here, and we wanted to tap into their experience and understanding, many of whom have already spoken with you today. And then we also worked with the other key stakeholders who had already demonstrated that this topic was of significant interest to them. And lastly, I will say it was very important that we did this in consultation with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Since this was going to have such a tremendous impact on how things work through schools, we needed to sort of work with our sister agency in terms of that. So in terms of key provisions of the regulations, the first thing to understand is that these regulations apply to all extracurricular interscholastic sports for public middle and high schools and schools who are members of the MIAA, the Interscholastic Athletic Association. It does not apply to town leagues, club sports, Pop Warner, et cetera. And during our public comment period after we proposed the draft regulations, we got a lot of comment from parents at both the hearings and then submitted written testimony. We're like, why aren't you applying this to Pop Warner or the town lacrosse or town soccer? And it was because we did not have the statutory authority to be able to do that. And I'll come back to that. I will say, though, that we are receiving interest and inquiries from these other kinds of sporting sort of organizations that want to think about how to apply this to what they're doing, and we are certainly supportive of that, but we weren't able to require that. There's 7 areas sort of selected or that are covered in the regulations, and I'm only going to talk about a few of them. First, for the head injury training, we identified initially, because this statute was passed as an emergency law, which meant that it went into effect immediately, and so we were kind of scrambling to address it while wanting to take a thoughtful approach to developing the regulations in general. And so the annual training for the folks that are listed here needed to be, quote, DPH approved. And so in the early in the process after this law was signed in July of that summer, we identified these 2 online free trainings that covered the specific topics that the statute required and that would be easy for people to do and would not impose any barriers. In terms of participation requirements for students and parents, they have to do the education and training, so they have to complete an approved training annually. Again, it's every year that's required in the statute. That wasn't something we came up with, that was delineated in the statute. But there's flexibility in how this can be implemented. And many of the schools that we've been in contact with and have been working with have come up with some very, I think, creative and effective and efficient ways of doing that. The parents also had to document, as I mentioned, the head injury history form, and they needed to do that before participating each season, and then if the student sustained an injury outside of school, riding their bike, what have you, they needed to submit that to the school so that the school would have that information and adjust their approach to athletic accordingly. In terms of exclusion from play, and I believe you've already discussed sort of the low threshold here, but that students who sustain a head injury or a suspected concussion during athletics have to be removed from play, and they can't go back until they've been, can't go back that day. So this effectively means there's not a sideline sort of approach to diagnosis. They need to be out for the day so they can have a more comprehensive and thorough evaluation, and it requires that parents have to be notified. In terms of medical clearance and authorization, so the statute also specifically addressed the concept of how this would be handled. So students who are removed for a head injury or suspected concussion have to have obtained medical clearance before they're allowed to return. That's in the statute and mirrored in the regulations. And then the identification or the delineation of categories of individuals who can do that are listed here. And the issue here is wanting to make sure that the students are fully and completely assessed, and you can see that the physician, the certified athletic trainer, the nurse practitioner, and the neuropsychologist. So if diagnosed with a concussion, a graduated reentry plan needs to be developed for both academic and extracurricular activity. And I want to say that the strength of our proposal on this fact really reflects, I think, strong consensus among the expert clinical advisory group that we convened, that this law was going to be not nearly as effective as it should be if we didn't have a way of making sure that there was a low threshold for kids to be identified with suspected concussion so that they wouldn't play injured, but B, have a very discrete and explicit way of getting them back into play to ensure that they don't go back before their symptoms are fully resolved and their concussions are fully healed. And that was a very strong and I think unanimous consensus from the advisory group. So we've partnered with elementary and secondary education to provide guidance to schools specifically about the academic accommodation options. And I think that this is a really unique to the state, that of all the different states we're considering different laws, I think we are unique in that we've taken a proactive approach to recognizing that if we're going to have a return to athletics track, we need to have also a return to academics and make sure that people understand the implication of cognitive rest and what that means for a kid whose main job is to go to school and think and write and take tests. So I think I'm really excited that elementary and secondary education was very forthcoming in working with us about this and identifying pathways for schools to be able to accommodate students. So the elements of medical clearance, again, in this form was developed with specific guidance and input from our advisory committee. It needs to include the date and nature of injury, the symptoms, what were they and how long did they last, whether or not the athlete has had any prior concussions, and then the final diagnosis, whether or not it was a concussion or something else. If it's diagnosed that the child had a complicated migraine, then important to know that, and then that allows people to, go down a different path. And then the date that the graduated return to play plan was completed so that people know that the student is truly ready to go back. So what are some expectations for key stakeholders? And I wanted to start with this because, again, our regulations at the specific strong suggestion of the Clinical Advisory Committee was to put something in there to ensure that those folks who are involved in returning athletes to play had a baseline understanding of what that entailed and of concussion and the what one needed to know and what one needed to look out for. So from medical professionals, specifically health professionals, obviously we need to make sure that they're aware of these regulations, and that as of September of next year, September of 2013, that when the health professionals documenting that a student is able to return to play, they have to assert or affirm that they have the appropriate training to be able to do that. And there's multiple ways of doing it. It doesn't mean that you have to go necessarily take a different sort of kind of training course, but there's different ways of doing that. And newly available, I don't know how many people have seen it or if people have already talked about it today, the CDC has specific training that's geared towards health professionals, not just to parents and coaches, and that's the Heads Up to Clinicians concussion training. And again, have people seen that or tried that? A little bit. So that's out there, and I'm sure that folks will talk about it more, but that's specifically geared toward clinicians with much more in-depth on the physiology, the pathophysiology, and then the clinical management. In February of this past year, we issued a clinical advisory to pediatric health providers across the Commonwealth. We had been hearing from both athletic trainers, parents, and especially from school nurses that, hey, you got to make sure that the clinicians know about this because they're not necessarily all engaging in this in the way that you're expecting. And, writing on a prescription pad, Joe can go back to, football practice without the graduated return to play and all those other elements. So we heard that, and then we developed this pediatric clinical advisory, and with the AAP sent that around. Other expectations for the clinicians, obviously your careful history and physical, which you would do anyway, the use of either our medical clearance and authorization form or an equivalent. And then these last three pieces, I would say, is really an element of best practice in operating a medical home, right? I mean, we are very much a proponent of the medical home concept, but a key part of that is that there's good communication between or and among all the folks who are involved with caring for a particular child. So that would include communicating with the school-based team, the certified athletic trainer, and the school nurse. They may see, as I'm sure, since half the audience are, fall into those categories, you all see symptoms and have the kid come to you and hang out in your office with a headache that they may not, A, report to their parents, and B, get to the doctor. So you all have important information that needs to be shared with them, and they need to be able to get that from you, and vice versa. And highlighting the importance of both physical and cognitive rest. And that's an evolution, but the concept of cognitive rest especially is very important with the athlete and the families so that everyone's getting them the same message. And then consider the use of education and monitoring materials. People have really been great at developing examples of how you can do this with kids and families, and there's good examples here in the state of how that's been done. This is just a picture of the CDC training. So what's expected for the athletes and the parents? So for the athletes, they need to complete the training. This next bullet is probably hard, but being honest with the parents and the coaches about what their symptoms are. Sometimes they won't necessarily tell the parents or the coaches. They might share it with their teammates, and creating an environment where there's a low threshold to share about that, and looking out for their teammates and being able to say, look, he's not quite right. She's not really sort of performing like she usually does. And then this last one is incredibly hard, as I'm sure any of the folks in the audience who are trying to support kids in doing this, sort of following the cognitive rest, right? I mean, kids are now attached, surgically to some sort of electronic device. And so the idea of sort of ripping it from their hand and saying that, you can't spend all your waking hours on it is tricky, but obviously it's an important part of the cognitive rest. the parents doing the training, doing the pre-participation form for the reasons that we discussed, and then communicating with the athletic staff. And this last piece, in terms of if a child is injured, working with the schools, working with their health providers to be part of that return to play and return to academics plan, and then monitoring the child closely. All right, so I had to put this up here because someone made me aware of this. You guys, have you seen this? Oh, so this person is laughing. So you can go to this website and you can get a fake doctor note where you sort of say what the city and town is and stuff, and it comes with the signature and the whole thing. So I just put this up here. It's just, it's an interesting little cottage industry here because you can get 4 or 5 for, $15. But be aware, those of you who have to be on the other end of these, that they exist. And you can see there's 41 forms for $14.95. So there's a whole host of them. It was actually appalling when I went there. I couldn't believe it, but there you go. So what's expected? Coaches and athletic directors. So the training, participating in the policy development, which I'll come back to, reviewing those forms, determining whether or not a student can participate in sports or whether or not, there needs to be any specific modifications, what position they play or what kind of practice they engage in, and then clearly teaching proper techniques. And then removing the athlete from play when the concussion is suspected and communicating that with the parent. How about school nurses and certified athletic trainers? Same first section, and I think a really important part here that I would emphasize is the communication, because these key stakeholders are health professionals, the communication with the child's medical home to make sure everyone is on the same page and has the same information about what signs and symptoms the child is exhibiting. I can't emphasize that enough, because seeing a child in different environments, you get very different information, and that a complete story, to have a complete story, it's important to be able to do this. And I mention this because I've spoken with several athletic trainers who've called to talk about this, that they'll get a student who will be, quote, cleared, but when they see the student still has symptoms. And they're like, well, the doctor said that they were okay, but I'm still seeing symptoms. And that, to me, is an exact example of when this communication needs to happen, because chances are the physician or whomever gave that clearance wasn't aware of the symptoms or the signs that you are seeing, and we really need to have that conversation. So principals, teachers, and guidance counselors, participating in the policy development. And I think here it's developing the, whatever sort of academic accommodations are required that really need to be individualized. There's no sort of one-size-fits-all for this, since we all know that the symptoms for any child can't be predicted at the beginning of the recovery period and needs to be adjusted. All right, so how's implementation going? So let me tell you a little bit about what our efforts are. So here's our website. So if you want to write anything down, write down this website, because this has links to resources, it has all the forms, it has other materials. For example, if there are groups that are interested in obtaining DPH approval, that their training be designated as an approved training for coaches and parents or whomever, there's information about that there. So please check that out. We've developed guidance documents for schools showing best practice and facilitating sort of policy development. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then developed some criteria for approval for additional training, especially for the health professionals, because we know that requirement's going to come up next year, and we want to be very clear about what those criteria are. And as I mentioned, there's also up there the clinical advisory to the pediatric health professional. So if there's a clinician in your area that doesn't seem to have gotten it, you can print it out and send it with a nice cheery note. Did you know? Check this out. And that clinical advisory also includes a model gradual reentry plan to give people a starting point. Schools have been very hard at work, and I did this a couple weeks ago. The numbers are even higher. We've gotten 261 schools or school districts who've submitted either affirmation that they have interim or final policies, and by now it's probably closer to 200 schools that have submitted their an affirmation that they've done a final policy. We're not collecting the actual policies to review them. Schools just have to tell us that they've done it according to the criteria that are in the regulations. But the fact that this many schools have done it, and the ones that have shared it with us, and some of which we've included in this document that I'm going to show you, have been really impressive. And clearly people took time, they put in a lot of effort, and really had the best interests of the students at the forefront. And I think that we should be very proud as a state of what's been accomplished in a relatively short period of time, and what really is a model for the rest of the country. So I think that we are way ahead of the game here. We've developed frequently asked questions that are also on the website. Who's covered, alternative approaches to meeting training requirements that would fit with how schools do their, pre-season, communication with parents and students, and, a whole host of things. One thing that I will point out, schools have been very clever and efficient at adding the elements of some of these forms to forms that they already have, so they don't have to submit extra second, third and fourth pieces of paper, so it's all collected together. So this is the cover of the school policy guidance that we've developed, and I just showed you a couple pictures on there. Please, if you haven't been there already, take a look at this on the website. It has some great examples if you're in a school or working with the school that is not one of the 180 that have affirmed that they have their final policies. There's great information in there, many of which have come from some schools that have submitted theirs just because they wanted to share it. So here are some implementation challenges. These are all direct quotes that I've had when people have called me to tell me about sort of incidents that have come up in their practice. So, someone called me and said that, the student's parent was told by an emergency department physician in this state, not like, 100 years ago, but in this state, in the past several months, that he didn't have a concussion because he didn't lose consciousness, right? So it's that concept that prompted, I think, and I can pick on Dr. Cantu here for a moment, because he was one of the strong proponents that said, we have to make sure that people who are returning kids to play have a sound understanding of current, up-to-date understanding of concussion. Because the idea that someone can't have a concussion because they didn't lose consciousness, you all know that that's not the case. But if this person is busy writing the return to play note, clearly, they need to get with our program here. So this next one's come up, she's back in school, so she should be able to take all of her tests. There's a the idea is if you're physically present, you need to do the whole thing. And as I see some heads shaking, knowing that, kids may start and not be able to do the whole day. They can do a half a day, or they can do certain classes, or they can go to class, but they may not be able to concentrate and do all their problem sets or their tests, et cetera. The last one, he's still having headaches and can't concentrate, but, he's gotten the okay to go back to sports. So clearly that means we got to go back, start having that conversation again about what constitutes the symptoms and move on. But these are specific, these just remind us that although we've come quite a long way, we still, have our work cut out for us in terms of what else we have to do. So here's the website again, and some of the things that we have. I'm sure many of you have already been to the CDC website, which is terrific and has a lot of information, especially for parents and students in different languages. And it's already there in Spanish, and we've asked them to look at whether or not they can do it in Portuguese and Haitian Creole, because those would be the next two languages here in Massachusetts that we would want them to do, and they're looking at whether or not they'll be able to do that. So I talked fast. I think do we have questions, or no? I don't know how backed up you are. All right. So I see two questions, one and then two.
Hi, I have a question. Do you have any plans to work with the DESC, that's the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, for specific guidelines for school administrators to adhere to the cognitive rest guidelines? And I ask that question because when it's MCAS time, when it's time for the MEPAs, when it's time for you have the time for the student to do the testing on a schedule, a gradual schedule, and the administrators really need to clearly hear what you are saying when it comes to these kids.
Well, I hear you, and I couldn't agree more, which was why from the very beginning we specifically, went to partner with them, not on the back end, but sort of, throughout the process. A couple things I would say is these regulations and if you look at one of the FAQs, it's specifically around academic accommodations and what is already available to students that teachers and administrators can do. But what we did was ask them to make sure that all the superintendents got that information and that they sort of, push that down to their principals. Now, of course, as we know, I can't necessarily go to 351 cities and towns and talk to however many principals there are of all the schools. But part of the reason we try everywhere I go and I talk about saying that there are avenues for this, and that's where the school policies that have to be developed have to specifically address this. And parents, when we talk to parents, have to know that those options are there so they can, so that they can ask for what's available. I hear what you're saying, that it's not going to necessarily be the first thing that happens in all the schools, but it's there. We have them on record talking about what it is, and it has been communicated to all the superintendents. I think there's... I don't know if everyone hears the idea of who monitors the graduated reentry sort of process, right? So you can't start that until someone has said, look, you're looking good and you don't have any symptoms, right? And so you're talking about that phase. I think who monitors that really depends on where the student is and what sort of resources there are for the student outside of your office. We know that not all of the schools, unfortunately in the Commonwealth, have a certified athletic trainer that's full-time there to be able to monitor that. In the settings where they have that resource, the idea of, all right, you're good to go, start the process, and the trainer is able to do that, then at the end of that, I don't see there's no problem for them to be able to have that kind of conversation I'm talking about with you. You sent me Lauren, she's doing fine, we stepped up through here, she's looking good. You have the conversation, and there you go. That doesn't necessarily have to come back to see you. Now, not everyone has that option, so then you have to figure out who's going to monitor that and who's going to sort of come back. So it really depends on what the resources are in the city or town where you are, and specifically the school where the child is. Let's see. 1, 2. Oh, you tell me, sorry.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to move on to our next session because the questions can go on all day. But there will be opportunities after Ted Johnson speaks to ask some more questions. I think I can give you a little insight because I've got a son at Newton North High School and another on the way, and I'm very clear. You get injured, you don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
You don't.
Well, maybe that's
Right.
what it
That'll be the one soundbite that makes it to the news, right? So just one quick announcement. So if you notice Dr. Demacourt this morning was looking a little pale. He has moved the on-field thing. No, he's not sick. I just mean he wants to move it to the sun. So he's going to go out into the front of the building instead of the courtyard. So he said he'll bring sunscreen for those who are a little sensitive. So I'm going to invite Dr. Cantu up now.
It's a real pleasure for me to have the opportunity to introduce our next speaker. I've been at this concussion business a long time, long before it became topical and long before it had much interest, except the interest amongst the medical profession. We've always had meetings, we've always gotten together, we chatted amongst ourselves, we tried to educate ourselves, we tried to get better. But there was a seismic shift, in my opinion, that happened in January of 2007. In that year, Alan Swartz, an author who would later go on to be nominated for a Pulitzer Prize because of his excellent scores of articles on concussion and post-concussion syndrome and mostly CTE, wrote an article that was front page in the New York Times, and it was in front page in the Boston Globe as well, although different author, Jackie McMullen, was on it. Alan wrote those articles about our next speaker. And our next speaker is, as you all know, being in New England, an all-pro middle linebacker for the Patriots with a very illustrious career playing football for the Patriots, who went public with his own private dilemmas with post-concussion syndrome in that article. And since then, I believe there's no other person more responsible for this tremendous shift where the media picked this up and started to run with it. Other people, in my mind, have had major roles, Chris Nowinski amongst them, Alan Swartz for his great prose. But Ted Johnson got this train rolling that has allowed this topic to become as topical as it is today. And I'm thrilled that he's going to have the chance to talk with you now. Ted Johnson, please come up.
Thanks, Doc. That means a lot, more than you know. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and speak with you guys today. This is a very interesting, complex, terrifying issue. There's so many unknowns out there. I would say, in the medical world that it could be exciting times. This is new research territory, and there's a lot to still learn about this. But as a patient, it can be terrifying. There is no, as far as I know, I apologize if someone came up with the blueprint or the protocol for life after with this stuff that maybe I missed it earlier this morning. But as far as I know, there is no blueprint just yet. It's through trial and error that I've kind of gotten to this point. I'll give you a brief overview of kind of what happened. Initially, what happened after where I'm at today. And I would encourage you to, I really love the Q&A format. There's a lot of smart people in here that I'd love to hear kind of what you're thinking. And it'll help me kind of in my line of thought too, to maybe help, because I'm sure there's just a lot of, this is a forum to maybe ask questions is my point. So I'm going to go through a kind of a Reader's Digest version of what happened and where I'm at today and how I got here, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. Sound good? For me, where it started was in the summer of 2002. Okay, I was in a game. I got concussed in a game. I got my bell rung. I got dinged. Okay, let's all understand. I think people in this room understand there is no really sliding scale for concussions. Okay, is there a mild one, a medium one, a severe one? I think if you're concussed, you're concussed. I think we can all agree to that. Okay, a lot of people don't understand that. I got my bell rung. I think it was 4 days later, I was in a full padded practice. The very first, 4 days later. It wasn't a week or 2 weeks. And back then, I don't know what the standard protocol was for, I was under the understanding, and my doctor was under the understanding that it was a week of no physical contact. They put you in a red jersey, don't hit. I was put in a situation where I felt compelled to have to play against doctor's orders. So I did. The very first hit, 4 days after I got concussed in a game, in practice, I got concussed. And it was the first time in my life I thought, what am I doing out here? What in the world am I doing out here? This is insane. I knew something changed for me. And the acute issues I had were initially it's cognitively, physically massive fatigue, almost a feeling of despondency. Just you're there, but you're not there. You're a million miles away, if you know what I'm saying. Less engaged, okay? Now, I just thought as a football player, that's how you're supposed to feel, you know? Except for that, when that second hit, I thought, something's shifted, okay, with me. When I got my second concussion, I went to my trainer and I told him, he had me go to an independent neurologist. He kept me out of contact drills for 2 weeks, but it had already been established. I got concussed from that point on throughout the rest of my career several times. I'd say 2 or 3 times a week, okay? And people might say, that's crazy. You know, how you 2 or 3 times a week? Are you out of your mind? This point was validated. I ran into a guy by the name of Gary Plummer. I was at an event for Steve Young a few weeks ago. And I ran into Gary Plummer. He played 15 years in the NFL as a middle linebacker. Okay? And I asked him, I'm like, Gary, he was one of my idols. He's just he's a hell of a player, a great guy. And I asked him, you know, what do you think about all this concussion stuff? You know, what about you? How are you doing? He goes, Ted, I've had 750 concussions. And I had to kind of chuckle at that a little bit, but I also kind of understood what he meant, because he was saying that feeling of, and this is the feeling for me, and this is how it felt. As a middle linebacker, my job is to initiate contact. It's not to run away from contact, okay? It's to actually press the line, hit, engage, play after play after play. The feeling would be my balance was the first thing. My vision my vision got blurred. My balance was off. This warm feeling just came over me. And everything was like slow motion, okay? And at the beginning, they lasted a few seconds. Towards the end of my career, the time between feeling that and actual, where everything kind of came back and everything kind of sped back up, it took longer and longer and longer. Towards the end of my career, when that would happen, I had a buddy of mine. I was a signal caller for defense, so I look over the sideline. I see my defensive coordinator. He's signaling. I can't see the signal, so I play with a lot of guys. People around here know Teddy Bruschi. And I'd say, Teddy, I can't make the call because between plays it's about 35 seconds. It would take me almost that full 35 seconds for my vision to come back. So I'd be lining up for the next play. Teddy makes the call. He gets the adjustments. I can't do it. And I would just hope to God my vision will come back before the next play. And, earlier in 2002, it last 5-10 seconds. So that's the feeling of a concussion for me. That's what I would say, that's a ding. That's getting your bell rung. That happened to me, like Gary Plummer, easily 2 to 3 times a week for the rest of my career. And I was talking to Dr. Cantu earlier, and he said he made a point, and this is a great point. Most of my concussions came in practice. They didn't come in games, okay? They came in practice. And that's something that people need to understand. Back in the early 90s, you'd see like Troy Aikman and Steve Young. You guys know those quarterbacks, and they were kind of like, they had to retire. A lot of them, I think both of them had to retire because of concussions, or at least that was part of maybe why they retired. I'd be watching TV and I'll never forget, that's Steve's 7th concussion. He better be careful. That's Troy's 9th concussion. These things are adding up. He needs to watch that. That could be problems down the road. What problems? They never finished that thought. Or what? He better be careful. Or what? Now we know or what. We know what can potentially happen down the road. Back then, I just remember it so as clear as day. Is that always talking about these guys better be careful. These things are adding up, or what? I don't know what. The very first day of training camp. So I got concussed all throughout the 2002 season. The very first day of training camp in 2003. Very first hit, I got concussed. I went through that whole season. And do you think I reported it? Do you think I told anybody? It's a double-edged sword. It's in football. You guys all need to understand this about football. What makes football in the NFL unique, what makes it one of the best games, but also leaves itself open for a lot of problems, is that it's the only sport of the major sports that doesn't have guaranteed contracts. So when I sign a 5-year deal, I sign 5 one-year deals. So really, I'm just a hired mercenary for 1 year. I mean, really. We were all coming together, hey, we're a team, yeah, all right. And then when the season's over, half the team's getting cut, okay? So that dynamic in and of itself creates a lot of problems. So there's really no advantage to, if you want to get labeled as a guy that's easily concussed, I knew if I said anything, that I was going to have to miss time. The only time they can't cut you is when you're injured. I won't get into all the stories. There's crazy stories about guys coming right back from injury and or maybe a little too soon. They go out and practice. They film the practice. And then they cut him so the guy can't file a grievance later. Well, you practiced. I wasn't 100%. Well, you're out there practicing. So that dynamic in and of itself creates a lot of problems, okay? The thing you got to understand about this thing, and this is a key point in my opinion, is this is very shame-based. Do we have psychologists in the room? Good for you. Because I'm glad y'all are here. Psychologically, this is a very shame-based issue, okay? People will call it the invisible injury. I think it's fitting. I've been talking to people earlier about this. Oh, you look fine. What's wrong with you? Nothing. Well, you can't see into the brain. You know what? And maybe I'm having a good day. And maybe when I'm done with this talk, I'll be so exhausted, I just want to go back to my hotel and go to sleep. But we don't know. I mean, guys are afraid to even admit. Look at Junior Sal. I'm totally going off my notes. I'm gone. So here we go. Junior's death for me is the tip of the absolute tipping point. Junior was afraid to ask for help. He was ashamed. He was embarrassed. Pride comes before the fall. It does. Guys are afraid to ask for help. Guys don't even know how to ask for help. Okay? It wasn't until I retired So I applaud guys that are willing to at least speak up. You guys all heard from Dan earlier. It helped me. We were in the back here. Honestly, I don't hear this from guys. Him and I being able to talk about our problems, it validated each other. It's like that's why there's group therapy. I think group therapy is one of the most powerful types of therapy, because I'm a recovering addict myself. So there's this feeling, there's this comfort in knowing that you're not the only one that has these problems. Okay, and we just validated to each other in this 15 minutes that we were here that, hey, what you have is, I have the same thing, and it's okay. It doesn't make you crazy, because when I turn on the radio and I hear someone say, these guys know what they're getting into. Are you kidding me? They signed up for this. They know the law. Hell, players buy into it. You got players calling guys out for, you're hurting the game by speaking up on this. We buy into that mentality too, okay? And the thing about it is, it's sad, because I'll give you a story. I was very friendly with this very famous author, okay? And she would do book signings. And she would tell me when she'd go to a book signing, she would get a table that was short, that had a lot of depth to it, okay? So that when people would come up and she'd sign their books, they couldn't literally or metaphorically reach out and touch her. She did not want to mess up whatever their idea was of her as an author. who she was. She didn't want to mess that up. She wanted him to keep buying her books. Well, athletes are the same way. I don't want you to know I got problems. I don't want you to know that there's things I'm struggling with emotionally, psychologically. You know, because you feel like you're less than a man. You know, so when you hear, I hear people go, he knew what he was getting into. No, he didn't. When it comes to this specific instance, I did not know what the long-term repercussions were from multiple hits to the head. Nope. And don't tell me I knew. I did not know. Okay? It was a year, I retired in 2004. I retired, in the summer of 2005. I got concussed the very first hit in 2003 at practice. The very first practice in 2004, I got concussed. The very first practice of training camp of 2005, I retired. I waited till the morning of training camp 2005. I went into Belichick. I was like, Coach, I have to retire. I can't do it. Because I knew what was going to happen that day. And it was a shift in the sense for me as a player from it feels good to give these hits out, boy, because your job was to initiate contact and you're the one putting hits on. But when that feeling of it feeling good comes to this is hurting me as much as it's hurting them, that's when it was I knew it was over for me. Because I wasn't going to be the same player anymore. I compare it to guys like in other sports. You got basketball. A point guard is different from a center. A catcher is different from a second baseman as far as their experience in the game. There's a game within a game. Okay, my experience as a middle linebacker is completely different from a receiver. Say, okay. My job is to initiate contact. Their job, the good ones, know how to avoid contact, right? And so when I hear guys talking and calling out former players or players about this stuff, a lot of it, I think about these receivers. Chad Ochocinco's one, Chris Carter, other guys. And I think, you guys hardly got hit. You guys didn't even hit in practice. And when you did, you just complained about it, So it was like, for me, I wasn't going to all of a sudden, hey, like a catcher, you have a long career in catching. Hey, let's put him at first base so he can still hit. They weren't going to put me at receiver all of a sudden, So I think you got to understand it's also position specific, in my opinion, or at least look at it that way. And I don't know if there's any data or anything that would validate that, but you hear a lot of it's offensive linemen, a lot of linebackers, a lot of safeties, okay? Those are the positions that have contact in practice on especially the linebackers, especially offensive linemen. Offensive linemen are pulling around. They're coming up to second-level blocks. They're absorbing hits. Linebackers, you're 3-4 yards off the ball. The collisions are bigger. Safety, same thing, okay? So I think you will find that those positions specifically are having the most problems, okay? So I retire because my head hurt. I told Belichick I can't do it. I met Chris Nowinski. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Chris. He wrote the book Head Games, and meeting Chris changed my life in a lot of ways, okay? I met Chris a year after I retired. He came to interview me for his book, and he asked me what my symptoms were, and I told him. And he goes, have you ever heard of post-concussion syndrome? No, I've never heard of it. This is 2006. Have you ever heard of second impact syndrome? No. Traumatic brain injury? No. So there was a sense of relief, though, when he told me about this, that you can't imagine. If you don't know what it is you're feeling, and you can't there's no name for how you're feeling, that's scary, I mean, that's, oh my God, yes. I mean, I retired in my head. Okay, you know, my sleep, my anxiety, my depression, my mental fatigue. Okay. And so I went and I started researching it, and it just fit. It just fit. A lot of guys, and me included, I was not immune to finding relief. A lot of guys that are in pain, and I didn't quite feel right. I didn't feel like myself. You know, something was off, so I looked for relief. And for me, it was drugs, okay? I took drugs to feel normal. Not necessarily to feel better, but to feel what I thought was normal. Okay, I thought cognitively I wasn't, you know, something was off, something, you know, so I looked to medications, stimulants, to help myself feel better. And I don't know, I'm gonna just throw this out here just as a side thing. My symptoms, if you line up somebody with post-concussion syndrome, aren't they similar to somebody maybe with ADD? They kind of look, the symptoms are very similar. The medications they treat for ADD are very similar to what I've found in my research, similar to what some doctors would recommend for dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. The point I'm trying to make is there's a reason I think I was drawn to those drugs, because they helped me. At least in my opinion, they helped me initially. They were almost the death of me later. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's no coincidence, I think, that a lot of guys look to painkillers. I look to stimulants, to stimulate, to feel better, okay? My drug abuse it got out of hand. And in this process of trying to figure out help, it's hard to, if you have drugs and alcohol addiction issues, until you take care of that, you can't really deal with the symptoms, okay? I was going in and out of that. But as a patient, I'm trying to find answers. So I'm going to all these doctors, okay? So I go to this doctor who's a very, very well-known, respected doctor. Boston's a medical hub. There's a lot of great doctors here, and he's in the field of psychology. He's a psychiatrist, excuse me. And he got fed up with me. He got fed up. You know what, Ted? I don't know what to do with you. You know what? I'm going to recommend ECT. And I said, okay. And I only knew of ECT from the movies. You know what I mean? So I actually went and toured the facility where they do this. And I don't want to say the hospital. And I called Chris. And I said, this guy's recommending ECT. He's like, will you call Dr. Cantu, please? And that's how I met Dr. Cantu, is when that doctor suggested that to me. I went to Doc, and I went in his office, and I'm like, he assessed me, and I told him, this is what I've been presented with. Now, he's like, Ted, well, let me tell you something here. If you do that, it's like getting concussed over and over and over again. So as a patient, there wasn't like the post-concussion syndrome hospital, the CTE hospital. Well, I'm not going to walk into the CTE center and find help. There was nothing out there yet. It was all virtual. You do research and you had to figure it out on your own. But think about it. You got Dr. Cantu, who's considered one of the best at what he does in the field of neurology, and this doctor with completely polar opposite opinions on how to get to the same place. Well, thank God his opinion made a lot more sense, and I appreciate that, Doc, because that was a pivotal point for me. I could have, who knows. Point is, as a patient, I've been told, Ted, you've reached new research territory. Oh, that's good for you, Doc, but that's scary for me. But let me tell you something, and to all you doctors out here, One of the best things I've ever heard from a doctor is when he said to me, Ted, I don't know, but let me see if I can find somebody that does. I'm just telling you, as a patient, that meant so much to me. It wasn't, well, let's try this. We've tried it's, you know what, I don't know. And when he said to me, it's like, I don't know, and that's out of my realm of expertise, but maybe we can find somebody. Thank you, Doc. Thank you. About a year ago, my drug addiction was getting to hitting its peak. I went and got help. I went to a place where they call it science-based recovery. They treat, they'll treat it like I think there's a pharmaceutical piece to it. Okay, medicine has helped me. Okay, when your brain is all these hits, there's a physiological shifting of the brain. I'm going to make the assumption that my brain is different with all years of playing football than it would be if I had never played football at all. I don't think that's a stretch to say that. So I had to identify once I went and got help and I got off the drugs, okay, what are your symptoms? Anxiety, depression. Well, what's anxiety a lot of times led to the depression. And depression too, it's just this, there's so many things that you just don't want to address. I'm going to tell you something about, guys. For me, what I've learned is stress is, I think guys don't have the coping skills to handle the stress in their lives, okay? Stress mounts up and it's corrode or explode, and they will explode eventually, either by killing themselves or doing something. And let me tell you something, I would argue that there are things that I do that I never would have done in a million years. I thought I would never do that. Okay, now is it drugs? But there's also an impulse piece to it. Your brain, it's like, why did I do that? Why did I say that? Your head hurts, you're irritable, you say things that, so there's so many things to that. Anyway, I identified my problems, and I also learned, and I'm gonna wrap this up, so I would compare it to maybe a stroke victim in a sense. This is what I've found to work for me. I have to eat right. I have to exercise. I have to sleep. I have to have structure. I have to have a plan. I have to create a healthy living and working environment that gives me the best possible chance to succeed. I think inactivity is a killer for former athletes. A lot of guys stop being engaged in anything. You have to be engaged. Maybe not in the acute stage, but eventually you have to train, you have to constantly be physically, but mentally, intellectually stimulating yourself. I think, or it exacerbates the problem. It does. And guys really don't have the tools or the coping skills to handle things that maybe are all just normal things to you guys, but for us are overwhelming. And those problems don't go away. If it's your issues with your wife, I think the stat is 75% of guys are divorced within 2 years after retiring. So it's hard to quantify. You say, oh, this guy's problems he's retired from football. It's not the head stuff. I think there's a piece to the head stuff, but I'll understand there's stress, there's finance, there's loss of sense of self. I get all that. But I would also say that all the head trauma doesn't help it. It doesn't help it. So where am I at today? I'm down in Texas. I'm in Houston. I'm helping my family out, and running a restaurant. I love it. I want my kids to work in a restaurant. But it's perfect for right now. It's structure. It's always different. I I work out every day. I eat good. I get my sleep. I do talking therapy. Okay, a lot of guys, I mean, can you imagine the NFL? What if they, I mentioned this one time and I got laughed at. Like, why doesn't every NFL team have a therapist on staff? I mean, I don't know, just saying. It's, so this is the blueprint, the protocol I have had personally have found to work for me. And I have to be diligent. I have to stay on it, or else if I start creeping back into old thought patterns, old ways, I am in big trouble. I am in big trouble. And what happened with Junior a couple of weeks ago, I felt like I did my part in 07, like Doc mentioned. I felt like I was able to, but with Junior, it's just, people need to know more about this stuff. And what helps me, Dan helped me, just in the 20 minutes I talked to him, it made this whole trip worth it. Because it validated my feelings that I'm not crazy and that you're not alone in this thing, okay? So I'll leave it at that. Is there, you guys have any questions for me? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. He was first. We'll go. Yes, sir. Thank you, guys. That meant a lot. Thank you.
As a college athletic trainer, I talk to my team every preseason. What could you have me say to my freshmen coming in to know what you know now?
That is honestly one of the hardest questions for me to, yeah. That is, the question was, what advice can I give her kids coming in as far as how to handle this, if you will? I would say, I would hope to think that guys coming forward, sharing it, will take some of the shame off of it, that it's okay. And I think you guys would know better than me is that I think the research shows that there's more documented issues with women in sports with concussions, and some of that might be because, if I read this correct, is that women are more apt to actually saying there's a problem. Where guys, it's the machismo, hey, no, nothing's wrong with me. Where a woman is maybe more willing to share something. So I would say, use me as an example. I don't know, use me as an example. And tell them that you might not be able to see that there's anything wrong, but cognitively and emotionally, you could be in a lot of trouble. So just tell somebody. And you know what? And concussions you can't avoid. People are going to maybe come up with all these different things to new helmets, new this. Good luck. I just don't see it happening. But treat it. My problem started when I got 2 back-to-back within a 4-day span. Let the first one heal. Make sure the symptoms are gone before you put somebody out there. I think that's the main thing. Yeah. Yeah. I've been asked, the question was if I thought about writing a book. I'm not, I always say the best books, you have to, I don't know, there's a lot of complexity to my story. And I've essentially, people would say, well, somebody asked me if the Patriots have contacted me. No. But that's okay. Here's the thing is I knew going into it, but there was something about not being, if I kept this stuff to myself, at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror And this issue is so much bigger than them. I mean, with all due respect, it can be XYZ coach with XYZ owner, but I don't know. We have any riders in the room? I don't know. This is the first time I've ever, honestly, I've been willing to be so openly, candid about this stuff, if you know what I mean. So, yeah. I think that is, yes, Dude, that's good. I didn't know that. You know, okay. The NFL, I think the NFL is going in the right direction. I think commissioner is more committed to helping former players than any other commissioner around. I was our player rep for our union for 6 years, 3 terms. And I'll never forget, Gene Upshaw used to be the president of our union. And it was an open forum where it wasn't a breakdown meeting, we're all like this, and I'm pushing them about this, something about retired players. That was my pet peeve, was to help, because I had guys that I played with retire, they're having the worst problems ever. And I asked them, for instance, this is one example of a program the NFL had years ago. I have a friend who's it's the worst alcoholism I think I've ever seen. And he got the courage to actually call the NFL hotline. This was a few years ago. He called the NFL hotline. He got a call back 2 weeks later. He said it was a cold line. There's no hotline. That was the program. You know, but I don't know. You can have programs. You can say all this, but are you actually implementing them and are you using them? I think a lot of guys are just, we're so fragmented and we're so, you know, a lot of it, we all come to play here. I played 10 years here, but I'm not from here. You know, a lot of guys, we all just, and there's no system in place. But I'm hearing that being talked about more and more, that there needs to be something for guys. I think I've heard the FBI actually is a mandatory, when you retire, you have to go to a month long, or it could be maybe not that long, kind of, like, thank you, on how to adjust to life after. I think the NFL can maybe come up with something like that. You know? Yeah. Yeah, it's another great question that I get asked, and I think each case is unique. My case, I would say yes. And people say, I'll let you say yes. And thank you for asking that question, because it'll get me to say, and this is how, football has been very, very good to me. And I'm going to tell you something. Football for a lot of guys is, for me, it was my way out. Okay? A lot of guys that play the game of football, I would say in particular, I know the other sports, don't come from the most nurturing homes. Okay? They don't come from Ozzie and Harriet homes. You know, a lot of our edge and what fuels us is anger, okay? Coaches, in a sense, become father figures. Teammates, in a sense, become brothers. There's structure. You never had that growing up. There's discipline. You never had that. I grew up in a single-parent home, and it was in a lot of ways abusive. And my way out was through football. I found, hey, I'm good at this. Look, you know, you get rewarded, you get validated, you're important. And I had a lot of anger. So it was a way for me to express it and it was okay, you know? And it was okay. So football saved my life in a lot of ways. Knowing what I know now, when I was put in a position in the summer of 2002 to go back into live action against doctor's orders, no way would I have done that. No way. I'd still play, but I would be, and this is another thing, is I've learned I have to be my biggest advocate in this whole thing. A lot of people don't know, they don't get it. Even your inner circle. A lot of guys, I've had people closest to me question me. And so you personalize that. Man, you know, even they are questioning it, you know. So, you know, it's case by case, but for me, yeah, I would still play.
How many concussions do you think you got in high school football? I'm assuming you played.
Yeah, I've tried to think back to that. I don't know. I know I've had my bell rung. I know I had. Because I've always played middle linebacker. I came out of my mom's womb as a middle linebacker. I was not an athlete. I just say I was a linebacker. So I know because it's the nature of that position is contact. So I know I've had it. I wouldn't be able to know how to specifically tell you how many.
Have you ever thought of Skyping?
Last question. Okay. I'm sorry.
Have you ever thought of Skyping within I work as a middle school nurse.
Mm-hmm.
I have active concussions 12, 15 per month with young boys who think it'll never happen to them. And this type of talk is super
Yeah.
beneficial. Have you ever thought of an active Skype with
You know, I don't know how to. I can get you my email. You know, if people want to maybe talk to me after and ask me about that, I've never done that. But again, Junior's death was only three weeks ago. I got called to do this last minute, and so I'm open to that. So if anybody wants to talk to me after about that, I'd be happy to do so. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks.